Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Launch a Podcast Masterclass with me, Heidi de la Cruz from De la Cruz Media. So today we are going to talk about how to launch a podcast. So I'll start with giving a little bit of information about me, my podcast, how I actually got into podcasting, the history of podcasting, because I'm a nerd like that. And I just love to research that and provide that information. The equipment needed for podcasting, checklist to start podcasting, pros and cons about podcasting, tips and tools, and then there would be a moment for Q&A. Now, I know since this is recording, you can go ahead and submit your questions via email, and I will provide that information later on. All right, so about me, once again, I am Heidi de la Cruz. I am a published writer and author, podcaster, and podcast coach. I write the weekly newsletter Into My Thoughts on Substack, where I write personal development content, life experiences with life lessons, and faith-based encouraging posts. I host the top 10% globally ranked podcast, The American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants, where immigrants share their story about moving to the United States. I hold a master's degree in healthcare administration, a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I currently work as a medical coding analyst. In my free time, I enjoy reading, listening to podcasts, of course, watching movies, and spending time with my husband and my 2 kids. All right, my podcast, once again, The American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants, where immigrants share their first memory of coming to the United States, cultural shocks that they experience, and their journey learning to navigate a whole new country. My mission is to change the narrative of immigration to a more compassionate and empathetic approach, like a Jesus approach, and provide a safe space for migrants to share their story. You can listen to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, so either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anything like that, or you can watch the podcast on YouTube. All right, so how actually did I get into podcasting? Well, I wanted to get into podcasting years actually before I actually launched, which happens a lot for people who want to launch. So I wanted to start in 2019. However, I was in the middle of my master's program, so I didn't have the bandwidth to do it then. And the first time that I was actually involved in podcasting was in 2021 when I had the opportunity to be a guest on the podcast Blended on the Bluff, and I was talking about my blended family experience. At the end of the recording, I had asked the podcast host a bunch of questions on how she got started and asked for tips because I was interested in launching my own podcast. So years went by, and finally in 2022, I was like, okay, the urge to start a podcast is still there, so let me go ahead and actually do this. So I started Googling how to launch a podcast, and I did my research, set up a plan, and about 6 weeks later, I had my podcast up and running. From there, I joined Facebook groups for podcasting and signed up for newsletters and continued to listen to podcasts. All right, so a little bit of podcasting history. So podcasts actually started back in 2004, but they were actually called audio blogs, and they were described as on-demand radio. So what happened was that Adam Curry, who was a former MTV VJ, and Dave Weiner, who is a software developer, they wanted to figure out a way to download online radio broadcasts to the iPod. I don't know if you guys remember the iPod, but that was like the first handheld music device. So they wanted to be able to listen to radio whenever they wanted. So they came up with a way to do this. And so the word podcast actually comes from the 2 words iPod and broadcast, so podcast. Although they were launched in 2004, podcasts did not actually gain popularity until 2014, so 10 years later. But since 2014 to now, the popularity of podcasts has just been steadily increasing. All right, so equipment. So to start your podcast is very cost effective, right? You can actually start your podcast with your phone. That's actually how I started. I started recording on my phone. So if you're doing audio only podcasts, really you just need a phone and a mic. That's it. But you can also use your laptop and a mic to do audio only. Okay. And then of course, if you want to add video, then you'll need to invest in the camera. But it's very, very simple, very, very easy to get started, cost effectively, just your phone, right? So again, I started with my phone, but eventually I realized like, okay, I do want to continue doing this. So I did eventually invest, in a mic, in the camera, headphones, all of that equipment. But to get started, I always say start with what you have and invest later. All right, so let's go through this checklist of things, to start podcasting. So first and foremost, you want to know why you want to start your podcast. So what is it that you want to talk about? And why is it that you want to talk about that topic? And then what topic is it that you want to talk about? What is your niche? So what are you going to be talking about? Okay. Next, you want to think about who are your listeners or your target audience? Who is going to be listening to your podcast? Who are you going to be talking to? Now, you're not going to be talking to everybody. Your audience is not everybody in the whole world. And that's okay because you don't want to be talking to everybody. You're going to have a specific target and a specific listener for your podcast. So who is that person? Get very, very specific on who that is. All right, next you want to name your podcast and then select the launch date. So with naming your podcast, I highly recommend that you go to whatever software you use to listen to podcasts. So whether it is Spotify or Apple, whatever it is, research the name that you want to name your podcast to see if there's anything similar out there or if that name is available. Okay. Selecting a launch date. I say select the launch date within 6 weeks of when you actually want to launch your podcast. That gives you plenty of time to make a plan, to set a publishing schedule, and to get all your ducks in a row. So if you want to have guests on your podcast, make sure you have time to reach out to them, to be able to schedule the recording and all of that, because there's a lot of behind the scenes work that comes with a podcast. So you want to set a realistic launch date. All right, next is choosing your format and publishing schedule. So choosing your format is, are you going to do solo episodes? Are you going to have guests? Are you going to have a co-host? Or are you going to do a combination of all those? For example, my podcast, I only talk to guests. I only speak with immigrants. I don't do any solo episodes. So that is my format. But there are some podcasts that have a combination. Some people do solo episodes and that's it. Or some people can have some solo episodes and then some guests on some of their shows, on some of the episodes. That's perfectly fine. But just, think about what it is that you want how you want your format to be. And then publishing schedule is, how often are you going to publish your podcast? Is it going to be a weekly podcast? Is it going to be a bi-weekly podcast, a monthly podcast, twice a week? Whatever it is, make sure that it's something that you can stick to. People always ask like, oh, how often do I need to publish to be successful or to grow or whatever? And it doesn't matter how often you publish. What matters is that you stay consistent. So for example, my podcast is every other Tuesday. And I've been doing every other Tuesday for the past 2 years, and I have not missed that schedule because it's what works for me. And so I want you to pick something that can work for you. So if you do want to start like once a month and then slowly increase the increments, that's perfectly fine. I think that would be better than going on a weekly and then having to cut back because you can't really handle it. It's better to add than to take away. All right. Next is researching your podcast hosting service. So this is not where people are going to listen to your podcast. This is actually the website that is going to host your podcast. So I have a list here: Spotify for podcasters, Buzzsprout, Podbean, Simplecast, Libsyn. They all host your podcast. They will all distribute your episodes through the RSS feed, which is what is your podcast URL. And that's what makes your podcast a podcast. They all have that. They will all distribute to Apple, to Spotify, to all the places that you want distributed for your podcast. What I suggest about doing research is they each have different features that they offer, and some of them you do have to pay. So my biggest thing is making sure that you do your research for whatever features that you need for your podcast, so that you have a hosting site that will help you with that. I use Spotify for podcasters. When I started my podcast, it was called Anchor, and then it got transferred over to Spotify for podcasters. I am still there because now I've added I've added video to my podcast, and Spotify for podcasters, you can actually watch the videos on Spotify. That is why I am still there. All right, next is creating a cover art. So creating a cover art is what people are going to see when they search your podcast. So it's the cover art. So think of like an album cover. And you can create this either on Canva. So you can create a free account on Canva. They have millions. Well, I don't know if it's millions, but they have thousands of templates for cover art. And the best thing about it is that they already have the size that it needs to be able to upload it. Okay, so then you don't have to worry about that. Now, if you don't want to do it yourself, you can definitely hire a graphic designer. And I do have a contact. So if you do need a graphic designer to help you with your podcast cover art, I can help you with that. If you are going to put your picture on your cover art, my pro tip is to do a photo shoot, like get a professional headshots done to make it look good. Okay, that is a pro tip. Again, that up to you to do it or not, but that is the pro tip because you want it to look good. You want it to look professional. Next is getting your equipment. So again, you can definitely start recording on your phone and then invest later. But if you know right off the bat that you're going to keep doing this and do this for the long run, go ahead and start investing in your equipment now with a good dynamic microphone, a good camera if you're going to do video, or just a dynamic microphone and then recording on your phone or recording on your laptop. All right. And then next is start recording. All right. Pros and cons about podcasting. So one of the biggest things that I love about podcasting is that it's evergreen. So the content is timeless. People can find your episode for years to come. So if you're using podcasting as a way to market your business, you're golden because people will be able to find your content for years to come. A second thing is the RSS feed is yours. So your show is not cancelable. Like the podcast is yours. You own the RSS feed. You can take it to anywhere you want. Like that is yours to keep. So think of it as like your domain on your website. When you buy your domain, that's yours. Same thing. The RSS feed is yours. With podcasting, you can reach a broader audience. So you can reach people literally worldwide. So you can, if you have an online business, having a podcast is one of the best ways to market because again, you can have clients from all over the world. You can definitely make money from podcasting, monetization opportunities. The network opportunities is endless as well. You can network with other podcasters. You can network with your guests. You can just network with clients. Like, again, the possibilities are endless with networking. Flexibility with podcasting. Once again, the podcast is yours. You run the show. You're the creative director. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to podcasts. Like you choose when you're going to publish, how often you're going to publish, what topic you're going to talk about. So that's one of the best things that I love about podcasting is just the flexibility of it. And then the creative expression, like I said, you own the show, you're the creative director, you call the shots. So whatever you say goes. All right. So cons. I'm always honest. I do let everyone know that there is a lot of behind the scenes work when it comes to podcasting. You have to research your topic, then you have to outline your episode, then you record, then you edit, you write the show notes or the show description, then you schedule the episode, you publish, and then you market. And in between there, you should be creating content for social media to market, the cover art and all of that. So all of this goes on when it comes to podcasting, and I'm very honest about, which is why I have this video to let people know the actual work that it takes to run a podcast so that they know that what they're getting into, okay? It can be time consuming, again, for everything that goes on behind the scenes to create a podcast. So let's say that you do 45-minute episodes. You're going to take a little bit more than 45 minutes just to edit the episode and write the show notes. So it can get time consuming, which is why I say make sure you have a good publishing schedule and just make sure that you know everything that goes on in order to launch this and be successful long run, okay? And then just like everything, when you're learning something new, there's a huge learning curve in the beginning. So there is probably a lot of questions that you may have in the beginning. There is a lot of things that can, go wrong and challenges and things that come up, which is why I go back to knowing your why. Why is it that you wanted to start this? Because that's what's going to keep you going when challenges do come up. But there's a lot of people out there to help you. I'm here to help you. So you're not in this by yourself. All right. So tips before launching your podcast. Listen to podcasts first and foremost. If you want to launch a podcast about real estate, I highly suggest to listen to podcasts about real estate. If you want to launch a podcast about coaching, listen to podcasts about coaching, specifically the coaching industry that you want to get in. So I will listen to podcasts about that industry. Next is join Facebook groups for podcasters and guests. There is a lot of people asking a lot of questions in those groups and a lot of other podcasters helping and answering those questions. So you can actually learn a lot about the industry, and it is changing, especially with AI being really big right now. A lot of things are changing in this industry. So you want to stay up to date. And in those Facebook groups is one of the best ways to stay up to date. And then also, if you're going to have different guests or you want to be guests on different podcasts, these Facebook groups are the best place to be a guest or to find podcasts to be a guest on. And then that's actually my next tip. Be a guest on podcasts. So you can be a guest before you launch yours, like I did, or you can be a guest while you're launching yours or while you're running yours. So then you can talk about your podcast on other podcasts and or your show on other podcasts. And this is also a marketing strategy to grow your podcast. So you can go on other shows to talk about yours and then drive people back to your show. Sign up for podcast newsletters to stay up to date with the industry. Like I said, it's always changing. So you want to stay up to date with the latest news. The tool that I am subscribed to is Pod News and Podcast Movement. Pod News actually sends a daily morning update on the industry. So there's that. And then the last tip always is to have fun. If this is going to be a passion project for you, I definitely don't want this to be overwhelming. I want this to be fun, to be, and exciting. There's lots of good things when it comes to podcasting, but I'm always going to be honest and just be upfront and honest and just say like all the work that it does take. All right, so here are the tools that I actually use for my podcast. To schedule my guests, I use Calendly, which connects to my Google Calendar, which works great. So it goes with, whatever meetings I have on there, and then it will show like my availability. I use Google Forms for questionnaire that I have my potential guests answer, and for the consent form. I use Google Sheets to keep track of the episodes and the release dates. So I use Google Sheets. I created a template on Google Sheets where I organize all my podcast episodes so I can stay organized right from the jump. And I actually have that template for sale on my Stan store. It is only $5 and it's already done for you. So you would just purchase it and then you would file save as, rename it, and it's yours. So it's the best way to keep track of your episodes on Google Sheets. I use Zoom to record. And the reason why I use Zoom is because a lot of my guests are not podcasters and a lot of people know how to use Zoom. So I don't have to educate my guests on it. So that's why I use Zoom, just keeping it simple for my guests. Some people use Riverside or StreamYard to record. Those are other options that you can look into. To edit, I use CapCut. And I used to use iMovie, but I just transferred over to CapCut, and that's what I used to edit, and that's because of the video. But before that, I was actually editing my audio only directly on Spotify for podcasters. But if you have a MacBook, you can definitely use GarageBand to edit your audio only content. All right, and then I use Word to write my show notes, and then Grammarly to edits, because we definitely don't want grammar or anything like that to get in the way of your show notes. All right, questions and answers. So I know that this is a recording, but if you do have any questions, you can email them to me at Heidy@HeidyDelaCruz.com. So it's my name, HEIDY at HEIDYDELACRUZ.com. Email me any questions and I will try to answer them for you. And if I don't know the answer, I will try to find the answer for you. Okay. So feel free to send me any questions over. All right. So as a podcast coach, how can I help you with your podcasting journey or launching your podcast? So I actually have a 6-week podcasting course to help you launch your podcast. The course walks you through all the behind the scenes work that it takes to launch your podcast. And it breaks it down in bits for 6 weeks that it's not overwhelming, that, you can work, and then you can work on things 1 week at a time. And then 1 week will lead on to week 2, and week 3, week 4. Okay. This course covers everything from discovering your why, making a plan that you can actually stick to, equipment, setting up a recording schedule. I go over editing on it, writing show description, like what exactly does the show description need, publishing and marketing your podcast. All right. So all of that is covered on the podcasting course, 6-week podcasting course. So here is the timeline of the course. Again, week 1, we'll talk about your why. Why is it that you want to launch this podcast? And then your niche and your topic and your target audience. That's all covered in week 1. Week 2 is picking a format. So are you going to do solo episodes? Are you going to have guests? Or are you going to do a combination? We'll talk about your cover art, creating a publishing schedule, again, that you can stick to, and selecting a launch date. So it's like, when are we actually going to have this podcast launch, and work towards that. Week 3, we're going to research more about hosting, selecting a hosting site, writing a description of your show, planning the trailer episode, and getting your recording equipment. Week 4 is actually recording your trailer episode, planning your first 6 episodes, start marketing your new show already, go over editing and picking music. Week 5 is you're actually going to upload your trailer episode to get that out there and start telling people about your show, selecting 5 people to be on your launch team, and then start recording your first 3 episodes, including your intro and your outro. And I go over everything that is needed in that. And then week 6, you have your launch team promote your podcast. You will schedule your first 3 episodes and record your next 3 because you already made a plan for that. And by week 6, you will be a podcaster. All right, so what are the different packages that I have available to help you? So I can help you with one-on-one coaching, meaning you and I will get together once a week for an hour, and I will discuss what it is that you need to work on that week. And we will get together again on the once a week, 1 hour, once a week, and we will choose, what day works best for you in that schedule. Okay. Option 2 is the podcast course that I was telling you about. So each module is recorded. The videos are recorded. You will go through those modules on your own pace, and then you'll send me emails, or we'll set up meetings as you need with any questions or clarifications that you may need, okay? Because I am here to help you on the step-by-step process to launch your podcast, because I do not want this to be overwhelming for you. I want this to be fun, and I want this to be exciting, and I want a show to be successful for you, okay? Option 3 is the ebook. I wrote an ebook with the exact steps needed to launch your podcast within 6 weeks, okay? So the ebook, again, will walk you through the step-by-step that you needed. It still breaks things down on a weekly basis. And again, you'll do it on your own pace. And then with this option, again, you'll be able to send me emails as you work through things to ask questions and get clarification. All right. Option 1 and option 2, there's actually added bonus for either of those. So with option 1 or option 2, you will actually get the ebook, and you will get the podcast starting kit. And the podcast starting kit, it's to help you get organized right off the jump. So the kit includes a monthly content planner and checklist, a weekly content planner and checklist. And what the checklist is the podcast cycle, so you can keep track of where you are on your podcast cycle, okay? There is a show note outline, there is an episode outline, there is a guest form intake, and then the Google template that I told you about earlier, so you can keep track of your podcast episode. That all comes included if you choose option 1 or option 2. All right. Again, option 3 is just the ebook. You don't get the extra stuff. That's just for option 1 and option 2. Now, if you are looking to have a song created just for you for your podcast, I do have a contact who will be able to create your song for you. And that is $125. And then what that is just a licensing fee that you will pay, and they will create the song to your liking for your podcast. And that is your song. You don't have to worry about, licensing or anything like that, or, copyright, because that is yours. Okay. Now, these are the current prices right now for these options. However, depending on when you are watching this video will depend if the prices change or not. So if you have any questions in regards to signing up or the pricing, you can always email me. The podcast course is on my Stand store, which the link is in the show description of this video. And if you would like to sign up for one-on-one coaching, you can send me an email. My email again is heidi@heididelacruz.com. I will also include it in the show description of this video to get you, so you can contact me to get signed up for the one-on-one coaching. And let's see here. Oh, payment plans are available for all of the options. Okay. So whether whether you want to do the one-on-one coaching or you want to do the podcast course on your own pace or just get the ebook, there's payment plans for everything. Okay. And that is it. So I am so excited to be a help and get you launching your podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me and for watching this video. And see you next time.